So you have worked with all kinds of different founders. And we had talked as we were kind of preparing for this conversation
Yeah.
about some different dynamics that, again, not always 100% of the time, but maybe have some tendencies based on some common challenges based on the type. And one of those matchups was the type
Hmm.
8 and the type 3, which in the work that I do as well, tend to be some of the most common types in the
Yes.
corporate leadership roles. So it's no surprise that you would have a type 3 and type 8 co-founding pair. What are some strengths maybe of that dynamic? And then maybe what are some possible challenges that they might encounter?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Eights, threes, sevens,
Yeah.
ones all tend to show up a bunch. And I have worked with founders and CEOs of pretty much all types. And yeah, the eight and the three in is an interesting dynamic. I think, yeah, it's so insightful. I mean, I love getting to get part of the secret of being a coach is you learn so much about different relationships and different people and yourself. And eight, being a challenger type and being highly direct and comfortable, just saying most specifically and sort of objectively, oftentimes, here's my thought. There tend to be just being a gut based type, tend to kind of put things forward very quickly. Um, threes being oftentimes, both active and extroverted and communicative, but also more aware of being liked and their dynamics with others. So sometimes eights can be um, pushing a lot. And then as a three, that challenging back to push back is a little bit uncomfortable because there's that, for many, a fear of not being liked. And so oftentimes I'll see that struggle of like
Mm.
getting that muscle built on the three side of how to push back. And sometimes it takes time because um, that what might be uncomfortable for the three is not very uncomfortable for the eight. So it like
Right.
really takes that timeline and work to build the muscle up such that there's some parity there and that there's healthy boundaries being set between the two.
Yeah. Oh, I can absolutely see that. And I'm curious too, the stereotype for them both, along with the sevens
Yeah.
being in that assertive stance, is that they're very future focused, going far, going fast, which I could see being a tremendous quality
Yes.
in that leadership entrepreneur space. But what could be like what might be missing that they will have to intentionally incorporate into a dynamic or a duo like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think something that can happen, under stress, that active side can be um, challenging. I mean, all partnerships under stress you have to be hopefully have done a lot of work in advance so that you can handle those stressful moments. And when more negative patterns of each type comes out, having the capacity to understand and take those in. But um, with a three under stress, oftentimes sort of fearing failure and starting to become a little bit more overwhelmed is something that can happen. And eights will oftentimes, the eight leaders I work with oftentimes will sort of be doing more driving and
Mm.
micromanaging and controlling. And so that can really just add to the overwhelm. So that
Yeah.
dynamic is one that could be hard because you don't have anyone who's really there to say, let's pause, let's reflect, let's make a plan. And that's sort of what the three leader most often needs is kind of getting back to a place of a plan.
Ah, such great insight. Okay. Let's take the 8 again and then
Mm,
pair it with one of on the surface can look like the complete opposite in the 9.
totally.
What do you like? What is that dynamic like in your experience?
Yeah, this is a duo. I've worked with for a while now, and it was a really interesting combination because, as you mentioned, there's in some ways quite different in body energy and sort of how one shows up. And yeah, nines, again, I'm generalizing here and
Right.
folks know, but there's a sort of an arm's distance approach. How do I not overcommit to too much, so that peace making or peace seeking side can be satisfied, not wanting to let too much in, compartmentalizing, sort of guarding against too much coming their way at once. And the eight sort of liking movement, action, activity. And so that push pull almost is something that can show up, which can be triggering for both, the eight leader being like, I want to go, I want to move, I want to do, and the nine being like, I want to manage how much comes in at once. And so it's an interesting combo that can operate in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the same time, I can see that being like such a great pairing when they both have that level of awareness, because it's like, let's go with the eight, but then like, let's pause. Let's see, let's look at the situation from all the sides.
Totally. Yeah, it really is. I think in the co-founder setting, so much about awareness, because it's first the individual awareness, and then being able to like say those things succinctly to the group, where you can have those aha moments of, oh, that's why we do this. Sometimes fall into this pattern that is upsetting or frustrating. And there's this duo that I work with had some breakthroughs in that manner, where it was realizing their differences in how they each like to communicate, and then finding some behavior shifts, sometimes just small ones of like, oh, if I as a nine sort of am too trying to kind of say too many different things, or too not direct enough, like, hey, if you want, maybe we could do this, or maybe we could do that. And the eight leader being like, this is really, what do you want? Very frustrating. And just a little shift of like, here's what I think, what do you think? And sort of being more comfortable with that from the nine. Huge, it doesn't fix everything, but it does make a really big sort of dialing down the temperature in those key moments.
Oh, such a great way to say that. Yeah. People are always, one of the questions like after, like, how do I find my type, is how do I use this information? And I mean, there's so many examples, but that's just a great one right there. Just a little shifts can, like, how much frustration and miscommunication can go away when you understand that about yourself and whoever it is that you're working with.
Yeah. I mean, also just in terms of how to use it, I think it is quite difficult without great coaching and support to be quite as proactive as one might like, because so much of it comes down to those taking the complexity of that awareness of, oh, I do prefer peace, I do prefer then not having too much show up at once, but knowing all of that and knowing how to manage the discomfort of then choosing to say something more direct, which a nine might fear will create lack of peace, but in actuality is something that their co-founder recommended. Hey, I prefer this. So it takes a little bit of that, someone to observe and help highlight that option. I think certainly you can learn those tactics on one's own, but especially in a partnership, it's much harder because there's so many more dynamics at play to really see it all and make those shifts.
Maybe if we could just take a quick tangent, because there's one other pairing I want to get to, but you said something, I think that's such a great point. And it's like, hiring coaches to help you, tennis, whatever kind of sport, like is very common for those reasons, because it's like, oh, I'm uncomfortable right now, I'm tired. It's like having somebody kind of push you maybe one more step, or show you how to do something easier, how to recover. So I love that. I actually was on your website earlier preparing for this, and you had written a really great blog about kind of the trends in coaching and getting more specific and the benefit of that. Would you be willing just to quickly share what you're noticing with coaching and the trends, and then the experience maybe you had with your breath coach, if you're willing to share that specific one?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm just super excited by how I think coaching is in this real heyday right now, with it becoming more normalized for leaders to work with coaches, which enables more coaches to go out and do their thing and be successful. And there's a trend in the field of sort of, we're learning more about neurochemistry and the brain and somatics, and then coaching best practices and tools like the Enneagram are all tightening as more people do this work. And then what I spoke to in the blog post is this specialization of coaches. And something I like to do, which not everyone prefers, but is to rotate my own coach like every 4 to 6 months, so that I'm working with them, taking in new things that I can sort of integrate into my growth edges, and that there's such great specialist coaches out there. So there could be someone great for communication using the Enneagram, or someone who's great at somatics and sort of managing emotional self-regulation through the body. And each of those can be very powerful when, especially when applied at the right moment for what you're working on. And yeah, I worked with a breath coach because I was had emotional self-regulation as a goal of mine as a 4. Sometimes I can be feel things intensely, and I've realized that it's both a gift and something I need to consistently work on managing and know how to do that well in order to be my best, to be the best coach and mirror to my clients and all of that. And so I found this amazing breath coach who, was so deep in that world, was really helping me notice my breathing and some specific skills to be more expansive in how I breathe, which is tied to relaxation, calm, and some areas of emotional self-management that were helpful for me.
We could all probably use a little bit of that.
Yeah. It was a gift for myself for sure.
Oh yeah. And I think even just what you do is so in line with that kind of that specialization, like not just a business coach, not just, but simply a business coach, it's, for founders. And then it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's what I need. And then you're able to bring and apply that specific experience and expertise, and then yourself being a founder too. So I love that. Okay. Last kind of matchup that we had talked about going through was the type 1 and type 3, which for me, tends to be one that sometimes people struggle with, like, am I a 3 or am I a 1? So there are a lot of similarities here.
Totally. And yeah, that is an interesting, thank you for noting that, an interesting element that there's similarities in a sort of a performance orientation, doing things either right or well, successfully. And yet I found that this is definitely a combo that can have a lot of tension. Obviously all types can get along very well if they're operating at higher levels of consciousness and aware of their patterns and doing all those things. But I worked with one pair where this was a very challenging dynamic, because the 3 being more, willing to do what it takes to succeed, and therefore open to efficient approaches and corner cutting in some cases, as they say in the startup world, 80-20 different projects. So doing just the 80% of the work needed to kind of get the highest impact. Whereas the 1 very much was, and in this case, the 3 was very much like, okay, what does the customer need? I want to close the sale. So like just doing only what's necessary. Whereas the 1 was like, okay, I have this project timeline that I've mapped out that's really perfect. And we need to hit these dates. And then if something changed, it was very frustrating because they had spent a lot of energy crafting a clear, right, perfect timeline. And so those differences, becoming aware of them and why they're there helped, but it was still a very challenging dynamic for each of them to deal with. Yeah. And
then how difficult was it maybe in that specific situation, or I guess what was the aha maybe for them that came out of like, oh, this person wants to always do it perfect. And this person is
Yeah.
okay, or I'm okay with cutting corners. Like how do we compromise, or what came from that one, just as an example?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's easy, I know, always to go to solutions. And so sometimes there are those
Mm,
behavior shifts, as I was talking about in the other dynamic, that were helpful for them. But again, I always do go back to the starting with awareness. And I think as they understood each other's perspectives more and really got what was creating the behaviors, like, if the three want to change the plan a bit to do what they intuitively knew the customer would like and therefore would be good for sales, but if that was annoying for the one, but just that awareness of, oh, this is how this person operates, it's actually helpful in these ways, I think allowed
mm,
it to be less painful. So that was kind of the aha, was just getting that real clear understanding of their differences.
yeah. And